I never thought a simple date at the university library would turn into a nightmare. I suppose no one ever does until it's too late. But let me start from the beginning. It was a chilly November evening when Claire and I decided to meet at the university library. We were both swamped with assignments, and she had this idea that studying together would make it feel less like a chore. I didn't mind. Any excuse to spend time with her was good enough for me. We planned to meet around 8:30 p.m., just before the library closed at midnight. The university library was massive, a looming Gothic structure with towering bookshelves and endless rows of ancient books that smelled like dust and time. It was usually bustling during the day, but at night it was eerily quiet. A few students lingered, lost in their books or typing away furiously on their laptops, but for the most part, it felt deserted. I arrived first, choosing a table in one of the more secluded corners, away from the main entrance. Claire texted me that she was on her way, so I pulled out my laptop and pretended to focus. But then I felt it, the sensation of being watched. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the dim lighting or my mind playing tricks on me. But as I scanned the library, my eyes landed on someone. A man, standing between the bookshelves, half hidden in the shadows. He was staring directly at me. He was tall, lanky, and wore a hoodie that obscured most of his face. The way he stood, motionless, made my skin crawl. I quickly looked away, telling myself that I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just another student, lost in thought, staring absent-mindedly in my direction. But something about the way he lingered unsettled me. A moment later, Claire arrived, her bright smile instantly putting me at ease. She kissed me on the cheek before sitting down across from me. "You okay?" she asked, noticing the tension in my face. Yeah, just tired," I lied. We settled into our studying, occasionally whispering to each other, making jokes, trying to keep ourselves sane. The minutes stretched into hours, and soon, the library felt emptier than before. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made even the smallest sounds feel deafening. That's when I saw him again, the same man now standing closer, only a few bookshelves away. He wasn't pretending to browse anymore, he was just watching. A chill ran down my spine. I leaned in toward Claire and whispered, "Do you see that guy over there, near the philosophy section?" She turned her head subtly, then frowned. "What guy?" I looked again. He was gone. My heart pounded against my ribs. Was I imagining things? Was I just exhausted? "Never mind," I muttered, shaking it off, but the unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. Around 11:45 p.m., Claire stretched and yawned. "Okay, I can't do this anymore. Let's head out." I nodded, relieved. We packed up, and as we walked through the aisles of books toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every shadow felt deeper. Every rustling page sounded like a whisper in my ear. We reached the lobby, and the security guard gave us a nod as we stepped out into the cold night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp air, trying to shake the feeling of dread. That's when Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Oh my God," she whispered. I followed her gaze. Across the street, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp, was the same man. He wasn't even trying to hide anymore. "Okay, we need to go," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Now." We hurried toward my car, parked a block away. Every step felt agonizingly slow. I stole glances over my shoulder, expecting him to move, to follow. But he just stood there, his head slightly tilted, as if amused by our fear. We reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I finally managed to unlock it, and we both got in, locking the doors immediately. My breathing was shallow, my pulse racing. Claire was gripping her phone. Should we call someone? The police? I hesitated. What would we even say? A guy was staring at us in the library? It sounded ridiculous. He hadn't done anything. Not yet. I turned the ignition, and as the engine roared to life, I looked up. He was gone. I scanned the street, but he had vanished. No footprints, no lingering presence. Just emptiness. "Let's get out of here," Claire whispered. I didn't need to be told twice. I drove her home first, making sure she got inside safely. The entire drive back to my apartment, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow trailing behind me. But the streets were empty. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the scene in the library, the way he had watched us, the way he had stood under the street lamp. It was the middle of finals week, and the university library stayed open 24 hours to accommodate students desperate to cram months of forgotten lectures into their tired, overworked brains. I was one of them. The library had always been my refuge, a place where I could escape the suffocating social expectations of college life. I liked the silence, the smell of aging books, the comforting hum of fluorescent lights. I never found it eerie, not even at night. Not until that night. I had arrived around 8 p.m., setting up camp at my usual table on the third floor, the quietest floor, the one least populated. The only sound was the occasional rustling of pages and the faint tap-tap of someone typing. By 9:30 p.m., the library had nearly emptied. I should have gone home too, but I was lost in my notes, half dreaming in that strange limbo between wakefulness and exhaustion. And then I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination. When you're exhausted, the mind plays tricks on you. The whisper was faint, barely more than a breath, like someone exhaling a word just behind me. I turned. No one. The rows of bookshelves stretched endlessly in both directions, their dark recesses barely touched by the dim glow of the emergency exit lights. When you're exhausted, the mind plays tricks on you. The whisper was faint, barely more than a breath, like someone exhaling a word just behind me. I turned. No one. The rows of bookshelves stretched endlessly in both directions, their dark recesses barely touched by the dim glow of the emergency exit lights. I shook it off and went back to my notes. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. A chill crawled up my spine. I tried to ignore it. I had to be imagining things. Then I heard footsteps, not the soft shuffle of a student retrieving a book. These were deliberate, slow, heavy, as if someone were pacing between the shelves just out of sight. I peered down the aisle. The rows of books stood silent, undisturbed. No movement. I forced a laugh under my breath. I was exhausted, that was all. Too many hours studying, too much caffeine. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then, a book fell off the shelf. It didn't just slide out, it launched itself, tumbling from a high shelf and landing with a loud thud on the carpet. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I walked toward the fallen book, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was an old library ledger, its spine cracked with age. The date stamped inside the cover read 1924, and beneath it, written in faded ink, was a name, Eleanor Finch. I stared at the name, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had never heard of Eleanor Finch, but something about it felt familiar, like a word you recognize but can't quite place. I flipped through the pages. The ledger contained checkout records from nearly a century ago, listing names of students who had borrowed books long before my time. Eleanor Finch's name appeared again and again. She had checked out books almost every week for years. Then suddenly, her name stopped appearing. No return date, no explanation, just gone. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how quiet the library had become. I shoved the book back onto the shelf and turned to leave, and then I saw her. At the far end of the aisle, a figure stood between the bookshelves. A girl, motionless, watching. My heart seized in my chest. The emergency exit light cast just enough glow to outline her shape, but I couldn't make out her features. Her hair was long and dark. Her dress, if it was a dress, seemed outdated, something from a different era. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. I did what any rational person would do. I ran. My legs carried me toward the stairwell, my breath ragged. I slammed into the door, reaching for the handle. Locked. I turned, heart hammering. The library was supposed to stay open all night. The doors should never be locked. Behind me, the sound of whispers grew louder, and then, the lights flickered. When they came back on, she was closer. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, I was trapped. The next, I was outside, stumbling onto the frost-covered sidewalk, my hands shaking so violently that I dropped my phone. When I looked back at the library, the windows were dark. No signs of life. No sign that anyone had been inside. Except for one thing. My notebook. It wasn't in my bag anymore. The next morning, when the library reopened, I went back. I told myself I had imagined it, that exhaustion had gotten the better of me. But when I stepped inside, my notebook was sitting on the table where I had left it, and on the last page, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 3 words: "Don't come back."